It is an involuntary experience that happens to every adult on a regular basis. You are walking through a dimly lit hallway in your house when a strange, ambiguous shadow catches your peripheral vision, or a sudden loud metallic crash echoes from another room. Instantly, before you can even identify what you are looking at or what made the sound, your body undergoes a violent physical transformation. Your heart violently slams against your ribs. A sharp jolt of adrenaline floods your extremities, your breath catches in your throat, and your muscles instantly freeze or lock into a defensive posture. A fraction of a second later, you realize that the shadow was just a coat hanging on a door, or the noise was just a plastic cup falling off a counter. You are completely safe, yet your body remains vibrating with an unwanted, lingering chemical panic that takes minutes to dissipate. Most people look at this intense overreaction and assume it is a sign of psychological fragility, chronic nervousness, or an unmanaged anxiety disorder. They get frustrated with themselves for being so easily startled or alarmed by harmless everyday occurrences. But the reality behind this frustrating reflex has absolutely nothing to do with your emotional strength or your personality traits. What you are experiencing is an active, unyielding architectural limitation built directly into the wiring of your central nervous system. Your mind is not broken. It is simply trapped inside an evolutionary speed barrier. To understand why your body forces you to panic before you can even comprehend reality, we have to isolate the two split-second data tracks inside your brainstem. To decipher the origin of this involuntary panic reflex, we must track the exact physical journey that sensory data takes when it enters the human skull. Every piece of raw information from the outside world, the sights you see, the sounds you hear, and the physical sensations you feel, is continuously captured by your peripheral nervous system and sent upward into your brain. The very first destination for this incoming data is a specialized egg-shaped cluster of gray matter located deep within the center of your forebrain known as the thalamus. Think of the thalamus as the master switching station or the central air traffic controller for your entire conscious experience. Its primary biological function is to receive raw, chaotic sensory inputs, filter out the background noise, and direct the relevant signals to the appropriate regions of the brain for processing. However, the thalamus does not process this information logically. It simply acts as a physical sorting hub. When a sudden, ambiguous sensory event occurs, like a sharp shadow or an unexpected noise, the thalamus is forced to make an immediate, instinctive routing decision. Instead of sending the data down a single, organized path, it splits the incoming signal into two completely separate neural highways that travel at radically different speeds, creating a profound biological conflict inside your head before you even know what has occurred. The very first neural highway that receives the split sensory signal from the thalamus is a pathway known to neuroscientists as the low road. The low road is a short, thick, and highly direct bundle of nerve fibers that bypasses almost all the advanced analytical regions of the brain, running straight down into the amygdala. It is an ancient almond-shaped cluster of nuclei located deep within your temporal lobe, and it functions as your primitive threat detection center and survival alarm. Crucially, because the low road is structurally short and completely unburdened by complex processing networks, information travels across it at a blistering pace. Raw sensory data can jump from the thalamus to the amygdala in as little as 12 milliseconds. This means that within 12 milliseconds of a sudden sound or sight occurring in your environment, your amygdala has already received the raw data. However, because this pathway completely skips your conscious processing centers, the data arriving at the amygdala is incredibly blurry, low resolution, and unrefined. The amygdala cannot tell the difference between a real deadly predator and a harmless household object. It only knows that something unexpected has occurred. operating on the ancient biological rule that it is far better to mistake a safe shadow for a threat than to mistake a real threat for a safe shadow. The amygdala instantly slams on the panic button, triggering a systemic chemical emergency long before you can see what is happening. While the low road is rocketing raw data to your survival center in 12 milliseconds, the second neural highway is taking a much longer, more tortuous journey. This pathway is known as the high road. The high road routes the exact same sensory signal from the thalamus upward into the visual or auditory cortex, and then forward into the prefrontal cortex, which is the highly evolved seat of logic, language, and rational thought. The primary purpose of the high road is to perform an exhaustive, high-resolution analysis of what is actually happening in your environment. It takes the blurry data and cleans it up, identifying the exact texture of the shadow or the precise frequency of the sound. However, because this analytical processing requires millions of neurons to communicate across complex networks, the high road is slow. It takes roughly 24 to 30 milliseconds for information to travel from the thalamus through the cortex and into your rational awareness. This creates a permanent, structural 12-millisecond logic gap built directly into human biology. Your ancient survival brain receives the data and activates the fight-or-flight response 12 milliseconds before your modern logical brain has even finished processing what the data actually means. For those 12 milliseconds, your conscious mind is completely locked out of the loop. You are forced to live in a temporary state of absolute biological delusion where your body is reacting to an emergency that doesn't exist. The physical consequences of this 12-millisecond logic gap are violent and systemic. The moment the amygdala receives the raw, unrefined data from the low road, it instantly initiates a phenomenon known as an amygdala hijack. Operating entirely below your conscious awareness, the amygdala fires an immediate electrical signal down into the hypothalamus and the brainstem. This signal commands your sympathetic nervous system to instantly activate, releasing a massive wave of noradrenaline and adrenaline directly into your blood. Your heart rate surges, blood pressure spikes, and your pupils dilate to let in more light. At the exact same time, your brainstem cuts off blood flow to your digestive system and redirects it toward your large muscle groups, preparing your arms and legs to fight a predator or flee for your life. All of this profound, exhausting physical preparation occurs completely automatically during that tiny 12-millisecond window. By the time the slow, logical high road finally finishes processing the data and reports back to your consciousness that the shadow is just a coat on a door, the chemical damage has already been done. Your bloodstream is already flooded with stress hormones, and your nervous system is trapped in a state of high alert panic. Your rational mind cannot prevent the physical fear response from firing. It can only stand by and watch as your body undergoes an unnecessary chemical emergency. Because the human mind is hardwired to seek rational cause and effect relationships, it absolutely hates experiencing intense physical panic without a clear reason. When the slow high road finally boots up and realizes your body is vibrating with adrenaline, your brain suffers from intense cognitive dissonance. To resolve this internal confusion, your mind initiates a process called retrospective rationalization, or emotional attribution error. If you wake up or snap into a state of panic over a harmless sound, your prefrontal cortex assumes that if you are feeling this terrified, there must be a genuine active crisis occurring in your life. It immediately begins scanning your life history to find a suitable target for the fear. It brings up a lingering worry about your job security, an unresolved argument with a partner, or a deep-seated financial insecurity. The brain takes the raw, unspent physical adrenaline from the 12-millisecond startle reflex and fastens it onto a complex, real-world adult anxiety. The thought does not create the panic. The panic creates the thought. You are trapped in a profound cognitive illusion where a split-second structural delay in your neural wiring convinces your conscious mind that your entire life is unstable. If you do not understand this mechanical order of operations, you will spend your day fighting imaginary psychological battles against worries that are nothing more than the cognitive echo of a harmless shadow. To understand why the human brain is built with such a volatile, seemingly flawed 12-millisecond delay, we must leave our safe modern environments and evaluate the brutal realities of evolutionary history. The human nervous system did not evolve to navigate peaceful modern homes with security systems and locks. For over 99% of our evolutionary timeline, our ancestors lived in open, predatory environments where a single second of hesitation meant immediate death. In a prehistoric savanna, if a bush rustled or a shadow moved, it could be a harmless gust of wind, or it could be a camouflaged apex predator preparing to strike. A hominid who possessed a perfectly band that waited 30 milliseconds for the logical high road to analyze the shape of the threat before reacting would be regular prey. They would be killed before they could even decide what to do. Survival drastically favored the individuals whose brains developed a hyper-reactive, low-resolution safety override. The 12-millisecond logic gap was an evolutionary masterpiece. It deliberately prioritized speed over accuracy, forcing the body to undergo a false alarm panic 1,000 times, just to ensure that on the one occasion where the threat was real, the individual survived. The frustrating startle reflex you feel today is not a design flaw. It is the ancient armor that kept your ancestors alive in a world where speed was the only currency that mattered. While this 12-millisecond glitch is a natural part of human biology, we must ask why it transforms from a passing startle reflex into a chronic, exhausting state of daily hypervigilance for so many adults. The answer lies in the concept of neural plasticity and chronic stress exposure. Under normal, low-stress conditions, your prefrontal cortex retains enough executive control to quickly override the amygdala's false alarms, calming your body down within a few seconds of a false alarm. However, when you live under continuous daily pressure, your brain enters a state of survival adaptation. Continuous exposure to elevated cortisol actively reshapes the physical anatomy of your brain. It causes the neural pathways of the low road to become thicker, stronger, and even faster, while causing the analytical pathways of the high road to shrink and degrade. Your brain essentially optimizes itself for threat detection. When your low road is hypersensitized, the 12-millisecond logic gap expands. Your amygdala becomes so reactive that it fires the panic alarm over smaller and smaller micro-stimuli, like a notification sound, a subtle change in someone's facial expression, or a minor shift in room temperature. You become trapped in a state of biological hypervigilance, where your ancient survival brain is constantly hijacking your consciousness before your logical mind can even intervene to tell you that you are safe. The true danger of the 12-millisecond glitch is not just that it makes you feel fear, but that it temporarily alters your entire cognitive capacity. The moment the amygdala fires its distress signal down the low road, it doesn't just activate your body, it actively suppresses your brain's higher processing centers. This is a biological defense mechanism known as cortical inhibition. When your survival brain believes you are facing an immediate threat to life, it determines that complex logic, nuance, and long-term planning are completely useless attributes. If you are being attacked by a predator, you do not need to ponder abstract concepts, you need to react instantly. Therefore, the amygdala actively restricts blood flow and glucose away from the prefrontal cortex, locking your conscious mind out of the executive control room. This creates a state of temporary cognitive blindness. During the window of time where your nervous system is marinating in adrenaline, your ability to think rationally, see the big picture, and regulate your emotions is completely paralyzed. This is why, when you are startled or highly stressed, you cannot think straight, you lose your vocabulary, and you make impulsive decisions. You are trying to solve complex modern life challenges with a brain that has been structurally restricted to basic, low-resolution animal survival instincts by its own internal wiring. The severity of this 12-millisecond neural speed trap is also heavily dictated by your daily neurochemical baseline, specifically your sleep architecture. When you are sleep-deprived, your brain suffers from a severe breakdown in functional connectivity. Under normal conditions, the prefrontal cortex maintains a continuous, stabilizing downward communication link with the amygdala, acting like a leash that keeps the survival center from overreacting to minor stimuli. However, neuroimaging studies show that missing just a single night of sleep causes an immediate 60% drop in the functional connectivity between these two critical regions. The leash is completely severed. Without the stabilizing influence of the prefrontal cortex, your amygdala reverts to an unmanaged hyperreactive baseline. The 12-millisecond low road becomes an uninhibited superhighway for panic. When you are tired, your brain interprets the entire world as inherently hostile. A minor unexpected sound or an ambiguous email doesn't just startle you, it triggers a massive, full-blown survival response that completely overpowers your consciousness. You find yourself spending the entire day locked in a state of intense, exhausting emotional turbulence, completely unaware that your psychological distress is being entirely driven by a physical lack of neural connectivity caused by an unclean sleep slate. When we systematically evaluate this entire neural process through a clinical, objective lens, we can perform a somatic autopsy on our panic and completely strip it of its psychological power. The next time you experience a sudden, violent jolt of fear or anger over a harmless everyday occurrence, you must instantly recognize the mechanical chronology of what is happening inside your skull. You must realize that your physical body has been hijacked by a 12-millisecond message that traveled down a low-resolution evolutionary highway. The tight chest, the racing pulse, and the cold wave of adrenaline in your stomach are not profound emotional truths. They are not an indication that your life is unraveling, that you are losing control, or that you are inherently broken. They are simply the physical, mechanical consequence of an ancient predatory alarm system that fired before your slow, modern prefrontal cortex had the physical time to read the room. The anxious thoughts that your mind immediately manufactures during this window are completely empty. They are nothing more than a desperate, fictional script written by a confused logical center trying to justify a raw chemical explosion. Recognizing this order of operations allows you to separate your identity from the chemistry, transforming a terrifying emotional crisis into a simple, predictable neural delay. Breaking the cycle of chronic hypervigilance requires you to change how you react to the 12-millisecond window. You cannot stop the low road from firing. Your brain is structurally wired to panic before it can think. Your objective is not to prevent the initial startle reflex, but to prevent the secondary cognitive illusion. When the sudden jolt of panic hits your chest, you must expect the biological delay. Instead of engaging with the terrifying thoughts your mind creates, your only goal is to look at the physical sensation objectively, tolerate the unspent adrenaline, and say to yourself, "This is just the 12-millisecond glitch. My rational brain is catching up." By removing the moral shame and the mental narrative from the feeling, you give your prefrontal cortex the time it needs to boot back up, restore functional connectivity, and naturally return your body to a state of absolute, unpolluted calm. Thank you for watching this explanation. If you want to understand more about the silent biological mechanics that dictate our daily human struggles, consider subscribing to the channel. This library is a growing archive dedicated strictly to the deep science of why the mind and body operate this way. No trends, no shortcuts, just the objective truth of our shared biology. Explore the rest of the archive to understand your mind, and I will see you in the next breakdown.